This is Broken Truth with John Davidson and Clinton Ohlers, and today we are with Scott Ventureyra, who is the author of COVID-19, A Dystopian Delusion. And this is very prescient, I suppose you would say, in your PhD circles. Welcome aboard, Scott. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Prescient in the sense that that Scott was really out in front on this. Yeah. Like, Scott, what time were you writing this book?
So, a little bit of background. So in, April 2020, I wrote an article related to COVID-19 and feminism. So I had seen an article in Forbes magazine. I forget the journalist's name at this point. And she had taken the time to make a correlation between female leaders and the efficacy of the response to COVID-19, saying that the female readers had given a better response than most of the male leaders. And so I actually went into this, I delved into the research behind this, and I found it wanting. So I reproduced an article, and it was published on a Catholic website named Catholic Insight. And so from there, I posted it also on my website, and, I got a little bit of a readership, not too much, but that was basically my initiation into writing about this theme.
Okay, great. Well, because so that was about April. I mean, that was well in advance of when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. came out with his The Real Anthony Fauci, which there's a number of similarities between your two books. But I think it's fascinating that you were on this in April. That was about the time my eyes were really getting opened. And I know, John, in the same sense, we were both looking at what's going on with hydroxychloroquine. Why are they not pursuing this, and a number of things. Now, what I found really interesting about your book is that whereas someone like Robert F. Kennedy starts out with the management of the pandemic right off the bat, you sort of set the stage in yours with the Great Reset and the New World Order, and really looking at how propaganda and cultural Marxism and all this stuff is working. Why did you take that approach?
So the first chapter is actually lessons lost to history. And so that chapter takes the approach of looking at what happened in the Soviet Union and comparing it to what's happening with the COVID-19 situation. And so what you have is some of the similarities where, the starvation that happened to the Ukrainians, and they would take away their methods of production. In this sense, the governments were coming after the small businesses in the middle class. So there's a similarity between what happened with the kulaks in the Soviet Union and what was actually happening in 2020 with small businesses in the middle class. And so there was a complete destruction of the economy. And so Travis Luciez, he wrote a chapter. I had asked him to write a chapter about that because he was fascinated with Jordan Peterson's thought. And one of the connections that I found interesting when I had met him is that he had realized early on what was happening with this pandemic and its relationship to the destruction of the economy and the loss of civil liberties. He had realized this, and the reason that he actually realized this was because of Jordan Peterson. Ironically, Jordan Peterson himself came very late into the game in terms of this realization. Now he has buyer's remorse for taking the first 2 doses of the vaccine, but initially he just went along with it, just like many people.
What's that ties into your chapter here, Unthinking Compliance, right? Or in the third chapter, because I thought this is so interesting. I mean, you've got lessons of history, the Great Reset, the New World Order, where you look back at problems that we've had going all the way back to, the George W. Bush administration and the Bill Clinton administration, showing that this stuff was really revving up for a long time. And then when you get into the pandemic, that's chapter 3, and I feel like you're opening people up to, these ideas of negligence, mass confusion, and then unthinking compliance. And it sounds like somebody with Jordan Peterson, what you're really saying there is that there was a measure of unthinking compliance going on.
Absolutely.
From a very thinking person.
But that's the irony, because here you have, so my friend Travis that I met actually late December, it was actually a party that I hosted with this, is because this lady had asked me to host a party for all these freedom fighters. There was no avenue or venue to go to. So I had met Travis there, and I was just struck by the fact that, Travis has education in college level education, but he was able to discern what was actually happening with this faux pandemic. And here you have Jordan Peterson. I'm not even going to say it's not thinking compliance, it's unthinking compliance, because I was part of the thinking compliance in the sense that I wear the mask where I go places. That's part of thinking compliance. And so a lot of people, I would suggest, a certain percentage within that 40%. I'm sure you're all aware of the 30% that disagree with the whole narrative, the 30% that unthinkingly accept it, and then the 40%, some of them might be unthinking compliant, and then some might be thinking compliant. So you get a mix mash there. And that's, I think that should be the target audience, the 40%. There's 30% that are recalcitrant. You'll never reach them. And then the 30% are, we're preaching to the choir, but that 40% is crucial to get that critical mass in order to shift things. But as you said, to go back to the chapter written by my colleague, Phil Fernandes, he's a, renowned Christian philosopher. He's debated many famous atheists at large university campuses. And he's been writing about this since the late 1980s. And everybody looked at him as if he was a kook. And it's only now in the churches that he's starting to get a little bit of respect. And he's been documenting, this chapter is a chapter that was written for a book on God and government back in, I think, early 2000s. And he adapted it to the Great Reset and what's happening with the vaccine issue and the digital ID. Yeah. So what's interesting is he goes back and he quotes, people from the George H.W. Bush administration, the Bill Clinton administration, to, I think we lost the video, but to the current, to the Obama administration and George W. Bush before that, and now what happened with Trump, who was putting up a little bit of a resistance, or quite a big resistance, which is another thing that I don't understand, how he's coming to support the vaccine after he's left office, which is kind of interesting as well. But so he documents the history behind this. They were always talking about a new world order, and people are trying to dismiss that as if it's something else, or trying to label it a conspiracy theory, but it's right in our face. You go to the World Economic Forum, you can look at Agenda 2030 and all the steps that they have. Everything's right there before our eyes.
Well, I think, one of the things that really interested me in your work, and also in relationship to your earlier book, Making Sense of Nonsense, is that I thought, we've talked a lot about COVID-19 on this program, but the larger issue is people waking up. Like, how do you wake people up, and how are people waking up? And I think, in a sense, there's a mass awakening going on. So, I was a little bit maybe hard on Jordan Peterson, somebody I really admire, but I can see where he's a little bit older. And to be quite honest, in April, that was when I had older family members thinking of taking the vaccine. And I had heard that there were some concerns that maybe it could make you more susceptible to later strains, and it might affect fertility, some things like that. But that was all we were hearing at that time. And quite honestly, I thought, well, what are the odds that, this is really going to be bad, right? In other words, it's more plausible that, they might have concerns, but they're probably working it out. And in retrospect, that was really misplaced trust, right?
Right.
And I think what's going on is we've been living in a much longer era of misplaced trust than we thought we were. And your colleague who was spotting this out in the 80s, and everybody thought he was crazy, well, that's because nobody could believe, we were, in a sense, we were too trusting. I mean, do you have thoughts on that?
Yes. I mean, for the longest time, I just had blind trust in the government. And it is only, in the past decade that I started questioning things, especially, the last 3-4 years, but even more so in the last couple of years. I mean, a lot of the things I've been seeing, brewing with gender ideology and critical race theory in the university campuses has really alarmed me in recent years. And so, this pandemic was just a step, further from these different modes of thought that have really no bearing on how people can actually think in the university. It just stifles a lot of the free speech issues and whatnot. But to answer the question, I think that, yeah, absolutely. This mistrust of government is something that's just developed in the last couple of years for some people. And, like you said, Jordan Peterson's an older generation, and he probably has like this inner trust for government. But the irony behind Jordan Peterson is that he studied in depth totalitarian regimes, and he knows what governments are capable of. But yet, because we're in the Canadian scenario, oh, well, this can't happen here, not with us. And it did, right? And it's like, part of the talking points I wanted to have is that Canada is kind of a playground for the globalists right now. I don't know if both of you are watching what happened with the trucker convoy in February.
Yeah.
And you saw the Emergencies Act that was invoked by Justin Trudeau, completely unprecedented. The only other 3 times that anything similar, it used to be called the War Measures Act, was invoked was in World War I, World War II, and then in 1970 with the October crisis in Quebec. They had a terrorist group kidnap a British diplomat and also an MP, Quebec MP. And so Trudeau had to invoke that, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father. And I think that was justified, much more so than this. This is absolutely ludicrous, the justification for this. There was no threat to our sovereignty. There was no threat to civilians or anything like this. It was all fabricated. But this, people better start opening their eyes when they see that. I mean, I think, a certain percentage of Canadians said, well, what the hell is going on right now? Even people that are vaccinated. Mm-hmm. So, absolutely. I mean, there is this shifting consciousness that's occurring right now. But I still think that many people are still recalcitrant, and they're still blindly accepting whatever the government tells them to do. And I think in Canada, it's more so. That's why I was so surprised to see the truckers movement. I was absolutely stunned by it. Canada, of all places, I never thought that would happen here.
That there would be a truckers movement?
Never. I never thought that Canadians would stand up to the government. It was inspiring.
Yeah, it really was. It really was.
It was incredible, and I was proud to be a Canadian again after so many years.
It seems to me like part of how the propaganda works is that we've been in a place where we distrust political parties, right? So if I'm a Democrat, I distrust Republicans. If I'm a Republican, I distrust the Democrats, and to the point that we even have separate news networks that we listen to, and we criticize other people's news networks, right? And so, but I think that's what's such an important part of how this whole thing is politicized, right? So that the side that is trusting the government. See, what's happening is less and less people are now starting to trust the government. That's where I think the awakening is coming in. We used to trust the CDC. We used to trust the NIH. And to even suggest that the CDC or NIH were participating in bad science to say, put a harmful vaccine out or something like that just for making money. I mean, that would have been outlandish territory for almost everybody, if you go back, enough years. Right. And then increasingly people have become suspicious. And then this is just, the full pulling back the curtain, the full reveal of how corrupt it is. But what I find is that the narrative that prevents people from waking up is basically just, the simplified rehash of the old political narratives that we're used to hearing. Right. They've just modified it. So now you're non-scientific, you don't believe in science. It's just, like Republican talking points, and you're probably a racist too.
Right. So Trudeau actually played that card, right? He said that anybody who's refusing the vaccine is a misogynist and racist. I mean, Where does that come from? Where do you go from somebody not wanting experimental injection to being a misogynist or a racist? It's just ludicrous. And I mean, some people, they're so brainwashed they can't even see that. But it's interesting that you raise, the political divide right between the Republicans and Democrats. Here's the liberals, the conservatives. But to be honest with you, in Canada, the liberal and the conservatives strike me as one and the same. And it was only up until the truckers' convoy that any of the Conservative Party became vocal against the mandates. They were all accepting it. Liberals, conservatives, we have a National Democratic Party here in Canada, all of them lining up for the vaccine. There was only a handful of politicians that actually spoke against this, and that was Maxime Bernier, the leader of the People's Party of Canada, who was a former Conservative Party Parliament member. He was the only one at the federal level. Then you had some MPPs, the provincial level here in Ontario. You had guys like Roman Baber and Derek Sloan. It's interesting, Derek Sloan started his own party. It's called the Ontario Party. And now Roger Stone is actually going to be an advisor for this party, which I find fascinating. Now the media is in a complete meltdown over this. And so, but to go back, there's always been suspicion between party lines. But now it's like, even there have been, forget about that dividing line. It's like these people have been fooled on both sides.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to raise another point to just give you a little bit of a backdrop with the book. So actually, they were both written at the same time, Making Sense of Nonsense and COVID-19. And so what happened was that I was under a publishing contract with a Christian book publishing house in Oregon. And I started getting curious. They accepted my publishing contract, everything was fine. But then I started questioning, well, will they actually publish this when they see the contents of each chapter? So then I started wondering, and I said, okay, why don't I send them a couple of chapters? So I sent them my sister's chapter on mind control and my colleague Martina Speck's chapter on the psychosocial effects of the lockdown measures. So I sent them those two chapters, and you know what they said? Oh, no, we can't publish anything that contradicts the NIH or the CDC or that questions mainstream media. This is conspiracy theory. Okay. Yeah. Martina's chapter has basically 5 pages of text and 7 pages of bibliography using peer-reviewed articles to source everything. And my sister's trained in clinical psychology. She understands PTSD, and she's seen the effects of mind control. She's a specialist in her field. Again, conspiracy theory. So I said, okay, well, I'll separate it to 2 books. I'll keep the COVID stuff aside, and I'll publish Making Sense of Nonsense with them. But then I said, well, what about all the other material, that contradicts the woke culture? So there's stuff against the Black Lives Matter. There's stuff against abortion, scientific materialism. And I'm not sure if you read the preface to the book, but my colleague Phil Fernandes, I quote him in one of the email exchanges we had, and he said, these bookstores or these publishing houses rather appease the world than God. They don't work for Christian values, but they rather just promote whatever is in line with our culture, as opposed to actually looking at the truth and what's good. And so I decided to cancel that whole contract altogether. And I was going to publish one book with everything, all the material together. And then the COVID book was just a secondary thought that came from that book. So it's contained within Making Sense of Nonsense, but it's also a separate book because people might be interested in that topic alone. So I thought, why not make 2 books out of it? The preface and the epilogue are a little bit different, but the contents of Making Sense of Nonsense is a wide range of different subjects, and there's about 20 authors in that one.
Yeah. Well, your engagement with the Christian publisher, I think, is really interesting. And I know that Josh Ferris was one of the gave an endorsement for the book. In fact, on the book, I mean, he has a quite a lengthy endorsement that's quite, I thought quite fascinating. And he and I know each other well and have talked about this issue of basically the churches and Christian organizations, in big association like the National Evangelicals Association and others, really getting co-opted by these large interests. And I think part of what you have is you have a group that already feels themselves somewhat marginalized intellectually for, the past 50, 70 years easily, really going back over a century now, right? If you go back to the modernist developments of the 1920s. And so there's this tendency to want to maintain cultural legitimacy on those things that are not, that are central points, right? Like that Jesus rose from the dead, central point. That Jesus did miracles, central point. A lot of people in modern academia, right, would say that's ludicrous, right? But so there's this tendency to try to pull a middle of ground with, secular intellectual research, much of which is quite excellent, right? And to maintain, I think, in order to maintain a certain level of legitimacy, socially. But what happens then is you get somebody like the director of the NIH, Francis Collins, who's carrying water for Fauci and for the big pharma, and he's actively misleading people when he's coming out with this campaign to getting the vaccination is just doing what Jesus would do to love your neighbor, right? And then the next thing you know, the National Association of Evangelicals is putting that out.
Right. Yeah. No. I totally agree with everything you just said, but it's been fascinating to see, I think I mentioned this in our phone conversation, the intelligent design community and these creation scientists that were being stifled, and they know what it's like to have their work censored and to be demonized. But I found it remarkable that I would look at some Facebook posts by, I forget their names, they're actually prominent ID guys, and some of them are creation scientists, like this guy from Australia, Safardi. I don't know if you've heard the name before. He's a physicist, but he's a young earth creationist of all things. And he would say, don't buy into the pseudoscience that's questioning the vaccines and all this. It was just shocking to me that they're not even entertaining any discussion, but it's probably for reasons, as you say, it's not to lose respectability or legitimacy within, now that, especially the Christian philosophers, they've gained some respect in academia over the last, 70 years, right? A lot of respect, because now you have like a couple of Christian philosophers, maybe at some major universities on the faculty of philosophy, right? So there's been a renaissance of Christian philosophy in the last 50 to 70 years. So they don't want to lose that. I mean, Phil Fernandes, the one that works on the New World Order material, he was friends with J.P. Moreland, who would actually invite him to give some talks sometimes, and he would promote his school of biblical defense. But he would tell him, like, just be quiet about the New World Order stuff. This is back in the 90s and 2000s. It's like, and part of the reason for that, I think, is they, like we were saying, it's like they don't want to lose respectability, but then at the same time, internally, they fear losing congregants to the churches. They feel that they might lose intellectual respectability for those outside of the faith. So I can understand this strategic point, but at the same time, it's like, if we're supposed to defend truth, why are we appeasing the culture in such a way, right? We're bending the knee to the world as opposed to God in that sense. And so, I've had many experiences with fellow Christians that say, well, Scott, why don't you focus on trying to alleviate the divisions within the Christian church? Like, for instance, an ex-girlfriend's father that I still maintain contact with, he's concerned about that. He thinks that is the spiritual division, is the people that are coming at each other, the people against the injections and the ones in favor of it. And he thinks that that's creating more of the division, and that's where, you could say Satan is where he's attacking the most, is that division, as opposed to just the vaccine issue, and that we're fixated on this issue without focusing on how to build bridges again. I mean, there's truth to that, but at the same time, it's like we have to speak out against this because there's so much information that's been coming out that doesn't warrant this to be even in the market.
Yeah, that this is actually very dangerous. I mean, so at this point, right, it's if you love your neighbor, you're warning them about the dangers of the vaccines, right? You're not going out and getting one yourself. And you're also not, I hear so much of this, we got to, because my background is I'm an evangelical Christian. And, I'm a former atheist and, had a pretty dramatic, conversion to faith in Christ. But what really bothers me is hearing so much about, well, we need unity and we need unity. Yeah, you need unity on the truth. You don't maintain unity by disregarding complete dangerous falsehoods just because they're widely accepted.
I know, I absolutely agree with that. And so I've been trying to press my friend Nick, I'll say his name, actually thank him in my first book because he was instrumental for me to come back to my faith. Although he's Pentecostal and I'm Catholic, but he actually laid down a lot of material that I was not considering back in, I guess it was in the early 2000s, when actually I embarked on my studies in philosophy and theology because of him. And now I see him being misled, which is unfortunate. And I've given him some material with Peter McCullough. He said he found it interesting, and Robert Malone. And so I'm hopeful. He's in the 40%, and he's very open-minded about this. But at the same time, he's fixated on trying to build the bridges. But like you say, there should be unity on the truth. I think that is the fundamental factor. And within the Catholic Church, it's just ludicrous what you see happening with Pope Francis, who's saying it's like an act of love. It's I think he might have even said it's a ticket to heaven, or I don't know, something ridiculous like this about the vaccine. And they had the vaccine passport in the Vatican, right? And the Swiss Guard wrote a scathing piece against the Vatican and Pope Francis, which I commend. And I mean, we're living in such strange times where it's like the leader of the Catholic Church is spewing this nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, look how well it worked out for the stand-up comedian when she said she had all the vaccines and boosters and Jesus loves her the most, and then she instantly falls over. If you don't think God's at play in this, you're not watching.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is the athletes. Have you been paying attention to what's happening to some of the athletes, right? Some of them dropping on football stadiums, like soccer stadiums, and then tennis players. I mean, I mentioned Jeremy Chardy, famous French tennis player. His career's been destroyed. Like I think he was early 30s or mid 30s, or maybe early 30s, and he may have had another few years in him. Now he had to stop for good because of the vaccine. And Nadal keeps promoting it, and they demonize Djokovic, which I commend, for his bravery to stand up against this totalitarianism within the professional tennis community. But and then Wimbledon, Sorry. No, sorry. I was just saying. Go ahead.
Finish your thought, but I had a question about Nadal.
Oh, no, I was just speaking about the Australian Open, how they banned Djokovic, even though he's healthier than 99.9999% of the population, right? And he's a greater athlete than most of the tennis players on the scene, but it's just they're trying to make an example of him, obviously. But
and that's all I want to say. Nadal is reporting breathing problems now.
I heard the same. There's still misinformation on the alternative side that will, elevate some of these vaccine injuries that might not be occurring. I don't know, or that's why it's like I'd rather verify the data myself before I make a conclusion. But I mean, it's not surprising that this is happening, and I mean the VAERS data is frightening.
And not even apparently Pfizer doesn't even report to the VAERS data. I'm going to do another interview soon with Stephanie DeGarry, whose daughter, Maddie, I don't know if you saw the little commercial. She was vaccine injured. She volunteered, and the parents allowed her to volunteer for this Pfizer clinical trial for the shot last year. And she's in a wheelchair now.
Wow.
And when she purchased ad time to run this commercial to try to get attention to President Joe Biden, you said it was safe. and she's been given the runaround by the hospitals, by the pharmaceutical, by the FDA. So she tries to purchase this ad to run it on Comcast, and Comcast sends an NBC Universal reporter after her from Brooklyn, and she defamed her. And we're going to talk about that soon, because the role of the media is complicit, and if not just complicit, they're proactively leading the charge on an attack on the United States and the West, just like we're all discussing here. I mean, but the media is the part of the big problem.
Right. No, absolutely. And I glimpsed over the article you sent me with the that was just published in the World Tribune, right, making the connection with 1984 and what the Biden administration is doing with that disinformation board. Right now in Canada, we have the Trudeau government deciding what counts as journalism and what does not count as journalism. And by the way, they fund the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the CBC, which is the most mistrusted news in Canada. But they said, according to some board, they said that Rebel News, which is one of the more truthful media outlets in Canada, they said that only 1% of their content counts as news. So they're taking the Liberal government to the Supreme Court on this ruling. But it's just ludicrous. I mean, they're just silencing anybody. And I mean, that's one of the things also, even though it was early on, it's like I started seeing the censorship that I saw was so disturbing that I don't know how anybody can actually say this is okay, but yet you have at least 30% of the people saying, yeah, that's fine. It's for the greater good. Mind-boggling.
Yeah, what I'm finding that's really disturbing me is like a step beyond what we were talking about, even with the politicization of saying, oh, well, you're an anti-science, anti-vaxxer, Republican or conservative, right? But what I'm seeing now is this concept of disinformation. And so what happens is you try to tell somebody some accurate information or show them some studies or things, and they'll just say, well, that's disinformation. So there's a censorship in a sense going on, a social self-censorship of that you have a large portion of the population that has been told, oh, this is disinformation. And that's their easy ticket to just be able to disregard, right? And so she said, well, one thing is, try to stay away from, the vaccine on the spike protein. And then another person jumped on and was like, that's disinformation. And I said, honey, here, send her a number of articles we've written, right? And so, and all of this, and most of them were ones I had written, okay? And I mean, these things are I've got a PhD in history from the University of Pennsylvania. I mean, I know how to source things, right? And these were well-sourced, relying on, experts only and an established, scientific studies, right? And so I said, that should back your case up, because she was being accused of not providing any real information, just spewing misinformation. So she puts that up, since she was, challenged to do so. And then the response she gets is, oh, well, that's a misinformation site. And then they reported her to the admin, and then took everything down, right? Everything that my wife had posted, they took down. And so,
I mean, sorry. And it's just a facile way, right, to dismiss your critics. It's just, oh, this is disinformation, misinformation. But yeah.
Right.
But you have to think bigger than this. Let's say that they left her comments up, and in 6 months, someone comes through with the same questions. They begin to awaken, right? And they look, and then they go, oh, well, this person's doing the thing. And then they see it's just like the Amazon comments or Amazon reviews that were fake.
Right.
We have to start wondering if there is a concerted effort to discredit any online discourse of truth. Who has the capability to do that? Who has the quantity of people already putting out fake information in terms of reviews or viewers on YouTube? You could go and pay like a Pakistani farm X amount of dollars, and you'll get an extra 80,000 hits on your website. So maybe someone's
ads on Twitter. Yeah.
Has someone weaponized these people in other countries? I mean, if so, then we are in a world war, and we don't know it.
Yeah,
I agree with that. I think we are in what we could call maybe World War III. It's the information war.
Spiritual warfare.
And spiritual. Yeah.
Because, look, if you look, like, I believe that mass faith gives power more than just, the authority to do things, but actually I think it kind of helps influence, right? So if all of our faith is divided, or maybe we had faith in government, maybe we had faith in the NIH and the FDA. This is almost like God dropping a crazy bomb on the United States so that we stop having faith in these broken systems. So in a weird way, this is a negative experience, but it's creating a positive outcome, because people like me, like you, we're all starting to come out of this and stop so much with the navel gazing that the society has created out of all of us and turned us into more of patriots, but Christian soldiers.
Now, John, for you, I mean, that's very true too, because if I'm right about on your personal history, it was when you started engaging with COVID-19 and then did your documentary Broken Truth on the suppression of hydroxychloroquine. I mean, was that your waking up moment? Or earlier?
It was a little earlier because I started getting upset when people were doing the protests, because I was like, well, we were just about to beat this thing. And then I found out that, right when the protests were going on, completely buried in the narrative was, oh, by the way, the Sapondasai hydroxychloroquine study was fake. I was like, really?
Well, when Fauci said that social justice is more important than social distancing, right? When it came to the Black Lives Matter movements, and then you see, these clowns like Trudeau bended on one knee to Floyd, right, with the mask on. It's like some Masonic ritual or something. It's just disturbing to watch.
Yeah. Well, and then there's been so many crazy things that I never thought I would see, and suddenly you see them. You start to have to ask,
Well, it's fascinating to me too, because if you look, like, take this from the point of view of a historian, right, is if you were to go back, right, and say, well, what was the presence of, let's say, when it becomes unavoidably true, like, let's say in a generation from now, and we're like, we're so much of our population and some things like that, then a historian goes back and says, well, what was the awareness in the early 2000, in the early 20s about the dangers of the vaccine? And they go back to, say, social media to get some insight to that. Well, if they go back to my wife's engagement on on a board of moms, then what they'll see is all that's left, right? Which is the original post, and then only posts that said a certain thing, and no posts that said the vaccine was dangerous, even though the vast majority of that string was that conversation. Or similarly, with you guys, I was becoming aware in April, May of the bad data coming out from the Journal of the American Medical Association on hydroxychloroquine, in an article that just preceded the Lancet one that John referred to. And so I started digging into that, and I discovered that the conclusions didn't match the data. And apparently I'm not alone in that. I just heard a conversation about between Peter McCullough and Robert Malone talking about Pierre Corey talking exactly about how you can't trust the conclusions of these studies anymore. You have to look at the data, because the conclusions are often written to different purposes. And this is what I was seeing, but that was right at the beginning of my awakening. It was hard for me to believe, how can this research be producing such a false conclusion from the data? So we reran the data, and I did the standards of deviation, and it showed in this study that was supposed to put the nail in the coffin on hydroxychloroquine actually had within it the data that showed this drug was working. And so there's all these conversations on hydroxychloroquine going on Twitter at that time. So I search hydroxychloroquine, and I go to these different discussion groups and start posting, my article. And now it's relevant to those discussions. I'm just saying, hey, this is something you may really want to take into consideration. Somebody in France gets ticked off, says I'm, spewing disinformation, blah, 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 reports me to Twitter. I'm immediately suspended. So within 2 hours of when I started posting, I was suspended. And I only found out about that because of chatter on Twitter where people are saying, oh, I can't believe it. Our Clinton Ohlers has been suspended. And I'm like, what? Because I was still getting, the comments still feed back a little bit after suspended. And so, I was off indefinitely. I mean, I eventually got back on after 2 weeks, but it was just, I was gone. And then everything that I had posted vanished. It's as if it were never there.
Yeah, it's the erasure of history, right? So,
yeah.
I mean, part of, my realization that this is, a faux pandemic was also, the retractions that I saw, right? Like in the Lancet, that was a huge one. And then, the studies that you saw that, Didier Roel published a paper, and then he's getting demonized and basically canceled. And he was like one of the most published microbiologists in the world, and he's a medical doctor, and he has a lot of experience with these types of drugs. And anyways, it's just astonishing to see that, and you start to kind of question yourself. And then I, at the beginning I was gaslighting myself. It's like, how could this be? It's like the majority believe this. How can it be that me and just a group of people that I know and maybe some fringe doctors and scientists, are disagreeing with the narrative? Is to go back to Francis Collins. I think we might have discussed this on the phone a couple of weeks ago, where I have a section where I go through the Fauci emails, and one of the emails that comes up is this email between Fauci and Collins. And I think it was reached out to, was it the head of the CDC as well, and some other scientists to write a hit piece on these quote unquote fringe epidemiologists that had tenure positions at Oxford, Harvard, and Yale.
Yeah.
I say in the book, fringe in terms of not accepting this nonsense narrative. Yeah, fringe in that sense. But what else? I mean, it's just ludicrous. And I also wanted to mention, because he's saying this is a huge issue, they go back and they just delete things off of Twitter, off of Facebook. So this is part of the reason that I wanted to get this COVID book out, right? Is because I want it to be a repository of information, but also to function as a historical witness to everything that's been happening from March 2020 to March 2022. And then I wanted to show who is who. Who's who in all of this?
Yeah.
Who's Fauci? Who's Fauci? Who's Peter McCullough? Who's Justin Trudeau? Who's Trump in all this? And I lay it out as best as I can. Who's who? And who are the ones that stuck up for freedom and truth and the love of their neighbors and even their enemies. We're sticking up for people that are demonizing us. We're treated as lepers. But the honest truth is, it's like we're actually your friends that are trying to help you out here. But part of the reason was that I wanted to create a historical record so that, if enough people have copies and there's electronic copies, it's much more difficult to erase it than a Twitter or Facebook platform, right? And so then historians can look back, okay, well, this was ongoing, so how does this measure up to other things that we know were, testaments of events that were happening right now or at the time period. So this endeavor just to create a historical record and witness of who's who and a repository of, I have 800 references in the book. I have mainstream articles, alternative news articles, videos, links to audios, peer-reviewed articles cited, so over 800 references. And so people can start to examine this material on their own and come to their own conclusions. But one of the main goals of the book was to create that historical record, that historical witness, which I think many books haven't done, and not that I know of, that have combined so much information in such a tightly packed book and so many references, and created this repository. Because usually it's like there's a focus on a specific issue, like RFK's focused on the corruption of Fauci, and other books like focus maybe on the involvement of the deep state or whatnot, but mine is all encompassing, and I have many references to back up all the points. So I think that's one of the most important aspects of this book, is the historical witness of who's who and all the information. And it's much more difficult to delete that than in other ways. If everybody circulates this around through the PDF files or or the books. Obviously, all this can be erased, but it's much more difficult than the platforms that these, big tech oligarchs are controlling.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of why I made the Elect as a social media alternative. Was, I don't want to. So I made a Facebook clone kind of thing. It's theelect.com, which was a direct reference to, Matthew 24:22. Except for the elect's sake, these days shall be cut short. And I figured, well, hey, if I could buy the website domain, if God made it available, then I should probably get it. And eventually, if we need a place to go, hey, great. Because I'm not sure that we're supposed to continue to use these tools that we have, because they seem to be sources of evil more than good. And when they silence the people that, we're not claiming to be perfectly right on every single thing, but we're just asking questions. And we're called, disinformation or misinformation or, anti-vaxxers. I mean, the fact that they called someone whose daughter was part of the clinical trials for the Pfizer vaccine, they call her anti-vax. They'll eat their own. Yeah. They don't care. It's cannibalism.
Yeah.
So, the thing that I struggle with personally is this isn't the first time our government has behaved like this. It's just we've noticed it now. It's the most egregious, perhaps. But you have to wonder if the government is under attack. All of our governments on the West. Does it deserve to be saved if it's created this monster or caricature of itself, of what it was supposed to be? We have laws that we can't understand, and we have, people that I'm not sure we actually even elected controlling us. Should we allow it to fail so that we can, out of the ashes, perhaps create a better West? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think this is, maybe the response to the so-called Great Reset, right? The Great Takeover. It's like where the power is restored to the people again. Maybe it was never really given to the people to a certain extent, but
I wonder.
Right. So I think that maybe this be a prelude to the Great Takeover, where, we start to control, the people start to control the courts instead of, these corrupt judges and corrupt lawyers and corrupt legislation. I mean, it's interesting, in Canada, they were sometimes barring parents from seeing their children because they're unvaccinated. So they would say, oh, go get the vaccine and then you can see your children. There was a few rulings like that. And it was interesting. I mentioned him in the book. And to go back to the whole concept of who's who, there was a justice. His name's Alex A. Pazaratz. And he actually did something different. He says at the conclusion of his debrief that he took the vaccine, but he gives a scathing report of all this nonsense about disinformation. He says, when did we get into this thing about disinformation? What does that even mean? Yeah. And that's, just to, dismiss critics just because they disagree. He says, well, that's, last time I checked, we live in Canada. We don't live in China. We don't just silence people. And interestingly, the case was about administering the vaccines to two children that didn't want it. And it was a dispute between the mother and the father. The father was demonizing the mother, saying, look, she posted this on Facebook. Look, she doesn't wear a mask when she goes to these protests. Look, she supports Maxime Bernier of the PPC. And the judge said, so what? She's allowed to. We live in somewhat of a democracy. It's like she can support whatever cause she wants. And so he ruled in favor of the mother, who didn't even have a lawyer representing her, and gave her final decision-making over the vaccine administration of the children. I would have proceeded in the same manner, but the issue is, well, I was told not to by my lawyer. I was told not too many people, but I would have proceeded in the same manner if my daughter was on board. The difference was that these kids didn't want the vaccine. My daughter said she was hesitant about it. She wasn't sure. And then I said, well, don't let anybody bully you into getting it. And I wrote a really heartfelt letter to the mother. It's in the appendix 1 of the book, and where I lay out all the facts. And one of the things, to go back to a point that John made, if we should, leave all these platforms because they're censoring truth. Well, one of the good things about these platforms is that we can use it, even for the time being, you can use it as much as possible against the narrative. We just post whatever. Sometimes it's taken down, sometimes it's not. I find that, they can't even detect sarcasm, right? So when I'm very sarcastic about our politicians, they leave it on. They don't get fact checked. So anyhow, so what's interesting, so I wrote this heartfelt letter to the mother with all the statistics. And I use the statistics from the Health Canada website. And I compare, the risk of dying from a car accident is astronomically higher than anybody under 20 dying from COVID-19. But everything was dismissed, and then I get an email saying, oh, by the way, Juliana, our daughter, got the vaccine. Okay. Thanks for the letter. All right. Great. So now there's an insistence, I think, with the boosters. So I put my foot down. I said, okay, we're probably going to go to court over this now. She's got the 2 doses already. Yeah. But it's just very disheartening, right? Because, you're trying to help everybody out here, and then you have your daughter that's even turning on you. So, there was a case conference where I reluctantly agreed to this administration of these vaccines, but it was never specified. Was it 1 dose? Was it 2? Was it 3, 4, 5? The chief medical officer of Ontario, of our province, is talking about a 5th shot now. He's talking about a 5th shot. Dr. Kieran Moore, Ontario's top doctor, right? Whenever they say top doctor, it's like it's a descriptor for a bottom feeder, in my opinion, and when like top corrupt bureaucrat, I would say. But
and Tyler's trying to push it through for infants now.
Yes, 6 months old. Saw that. Yeah, but 5th dose now. So for those who are immunocompromised, right? So. Does anybody question this? It's like, well, you got 1 dose, didn't really do anything. 2 doses, okay, 3, you got injured, okay, you keep going with it. I mean, the level of gaslighting in this is just beyond even comprehension. There was an example, I read an article a few months back where there was a child who actually suffered from a vaccine injury. Everything suggests that he took 2 doses of the vaccine. I forget how old this child was. He might have been, 9, 10 years old. And the parents, what did the parents do? They said, oh, thank God, he took the vaccines because it was COVID-19 that did it. It's just, you can't even make this nonsense up. It's just so absurd. But this is the state that we're in right now. And in Canada is the worst because in Canada, the unvaccinated cannot leave the country. It's the only country in the world. So that's why I say it's kind of a playground for the globalists, Canada, because Trudeau is, basically in open arms, just giving away all of our civil liberties, our country, in essence. Wow.
It's incredible.
Well, and you talked about the gaslighting too. Like, so this... is it Brandy Sardonzi, who was the NBC reporter? Is that right, John?
Right.
And her article is such a heap of propaganda and just scathing criticism and labels, and it refers to an anti-vaccine industry, and like there's some big conglomerate out there making billions off of criticizing the vaccine, and so it's all designed to emotionally manipulate. But what really is so shocking about it is that this is a reporter for NBC writing this kind of stuff after we've already had the multiple Pfizer disclosures, right? Where we've already seen the research that they did, where we discovered, hey, there was no real significance for the claims that they had that this was slowing down the vaccine. You know, like 1 versus 2 out of 22,000. I mean, that's not statistically significant. And actually more people died in the vaccine group than in the non-vaccine group, yet the FDA pushed it through. And then, like, that was, you know, that was small potatoes compared to what came out when they were forced to, with that FOIA request that required them to disclose, you know, all of that, those documents that they wanted to squirrel away for 75 years. And there we discovered that they were seeing extremely high percentages of adverse reactions. I mean, over 25%, 27, 31%. I mean, 27% were the people who still had lasting adverse reactions at the time that they published this work, right? I mean, so these were high percentages, and they knew full well that they were happening, and the FDA and the CDC knew also, and turned a blind eye to it and just rushed this thing through. And so it's in that historical context that this reporter is doing this kind of gaslighting. And then at the same time, you now have looks like the federal government's getting in on the act with a, you know, that article that you referred to that we have in the World Tribune is, you know, 1984 is here, DHS announces Disinformation Governance Board, right? So it looks like they're going to take the attack on the truth and actually give it government, you know, government power and authority.
Yeah.
Which makes me wonder how much, what are they going to, you know, we saw the corruption of the IRS under Obama. So now if you're getting the truth out there, I mean, if you're somebody like Peter McCullough, are they going to be coming after you with the IRS and, you know, who knows, Department, you know, Family Services and everything else to ruin your life? I mean, that's the concern.
I'm just kind of going through, I don't know if you guys can see this, but some of Brandy's articles, and she's really excited about anti-vaccines and anti-vaccine people. I mean, she's obsessed with it, apparently. Or I can't help but wonder, is she perhaps the person that NBC News brings out to trash something? So here's a great, you know, like I said, you know, Stephanie DeGarry was going to run this ad to try to get help for her daughter on Comcast networks. And yesterday we were kind of prepping for the interview that we're going to have later, and I asked her, I said, did you know that this Brandy Zadrozny works for Comcast, NBC? She didn't realize, Stephanie didn't realize that NBC News, NBC Universal, and Comcast are the same company. So when Comcast rejected her, they were going to run the ads, and then they decided, no, we're not going to do it. Here comes Brandy calling her wounded daughter propaganda.
Yeah.
And Brandy's got, you know, once struggling anti-vaccination groups have enjoyed a pandemic windfall. Why is vaccine sanity anti-vax?
In a year where Pfizer made $40 billion, the single most profitable drug in a single year in history.
Also, it's Orwellian how they're redefining the term anti-vaxxer. So anybody who's against vaccine mandates is defined as an anti-vaxxer now.
Yeah,
so it's absolutely absurd.
You know, if you don't, this isn't really technically a vaccine; it's an inoculation. And when I don't know if you've seen the Canadian doctors' medical breakdown of the Pfizer data, but they apparently want people to stay away from pregnant women after you've gotten vaccinated for 30 days. That seems odd. You know, the FDA is like, the vaccine is fully approved, and then they go, the long-term effects are unknown. but this, well, they're not. They can't think past 140 characters anymore.
Do they think that any vaccine you create automatically has to be beneficial and safe? Like, you can't make a bad vaccine, right? I mean, because that's how they're treating it. They're treating it as, well, it's a vaccine, so it's impossible that it would be bad.
Part of me wonders, some of her articles, Brandy said she's got 3 kids. And one of her articles somewhere I saw was about, people should give me a seat on the subway because I'm pregnant, which you should do. I agree.
Yeah.
But she went from that to going after anti-vaxxers, and I wonder, did she give her kids the inoculation and now she's terrified? So, and this is probably where a lot of people are. They're frightened. If you say that vaccine that you took might be about to kill you, people will lose it. And ironically, if heart inflammation and myocarditis are part of the reaction that the body has, then a frightening shock could literally kill these people. If they get scared of something, they might just fall over. And going back to that, how much of COVID, and do you remember the falling down videos that came out of China?
Yeah.
Early on, yes. Yeah.
Right. That was a few months after China had initiated a mandatory vaccination policy. Was what we saw not COVID, but actually vaccine reactions? And they said, hey, let's just call it a new cold. And then, and China didn't want to have a revolt on their hands because they'd forced this on all these people. So is this just all a big cover-up?
Well, they're getting very desperate. So CTV News here in Canada, now they're suggesting that noise pollution from aircrafts, from airplanes traveling up above the cities, main cities, is causing like myocarditis and certain types of heart inflammation like pericarditis. I mean, anybody who can't see that, they're irredeemable.
That
30% is just completely lost. I mean, it'll take something the example I gave earlier about the child in the hospital that suffered, a vaccine injury, and they're blaming it on COVID and thanking the vaccine. So I think that 30% will probably, in a lot of cases, still keep doing that, gaslighting themselves.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's a feature of cognitive dissonance.
There's only
what's even worse, right? It's the Stockholm syndrome, right, where you're defending something that's actually, destroying you. So it's kind of like the protesters that go out and they want more lockdowns, more mask mandates.
If only I just have less freedom, I'll be free.
Scott, what do you think we can do though to help people in waking up? Like what can break down that cognitive dissonance?
Well, maybe sometimes when I would hope that it's something, if something, tragic happens, that they start to wake up. But some of them, you're seeing that doesn't even work. But I came to this conclusion. John was saying this is, World War III in the spiritual way, right? And it's the spiritual world war. And I agree with that. It's also the information war. But with a friend of mine, he's a professor at a major university here. He actually wrote a chapter for Making Sense of Nonsense. He actually, he was not even touching the subject at the beginning. But then they kept pressuring him to take the vaccine. So then he had to actually defend it. He's a Catholic philosopher. He had to defend himself, saying, these are the reasons why I'm Catholic and I disagree with the vaccine. That's how absurd it got. But even him, he agreed with me. It's like we're beyond. I mean, he agreed that we are beyond the point of convincing people intellectually in certain avenues. That's the difficulty with this. So many people are so far removed, it doesn't matter what argument you throw at them. And so whatever logic you use, sound logic, good argumentation, evidence-based scientific argumentation, they just will not accept it. So to go back to the question, how can we awaken these people? So I think, to be honest, and this might sound harsh, that 30% is totally lost. And then the 40%, that's, in the epilogue of both books, that's what I talk about. That's, the group we should be focusing on, because this group why are they getting the vaccine? For reasons of travel? They don't want to lose employment? These people know, maybe deep down inside they know what they've done is harmful and wrong, or maybe they're just playing Russian roulette and they're saying, let the chips fall where they may. But I think that 40% is the critical mass we need. And maybe the intellectual arguments may work for them, but then on a certain level, if they're taking the vaccine because they want to travel and they don't want to lose employment, then argumentation is not going to really convince them. They become impervious to actually even listening to anything. They're completely apathetic.
Yeah. Well, imagine the fear that a parent has if you've got a child and they've taken the vaccine, and around the same time they're developing, some sort of problems that this child hasn't had before. The kind of guilt and just the fear that you have whenever your child experiences, any, thing that looks like it might be serious. You can only imagine the inner psychological drive to hope that this is just, something that couldn't have been avoided, not something that I actually did to the child. And I think, something, Scott, I know that you're a securities trader, and, that's something we share in common. And you're, obviously you're a successful one, since you support a, significant portion of your income through that. And one of the things that fascinates me and has really helped me gain insight into politics and the kind of thing that we're talking about people not waking up in the face of just overwhelming evidence, is the same thing that causes so many traders to lose money in the markets, right? So, there's a joke that if most traders could just change the buy key into the sell key and the sell key into the buy key, they'd make money, right? But instead, most people run through accounts, particularly, retail traders. And part of what's going on is that once you enter a position and have real money on the line, you now have great hope that will go up. And so any data that you're seeing from the screens that is suggesting that this is going up, right, you're going to believe that, and you disbelieve, be less inclined to take the step that says, no, this is really going down, right? And then it starts going down against you and you're losing money. Now you're really hoping it'll go up. So anything that suggests it might take a bounce, a person is liable to emphasize, and then they continue to lose money, right? And this is just a cycle that happens. And what's so fascinating to me is it can kind of work perception. In other words, there's lots of people that can go and they can trade simulated systems where there's no money on the line, and their perceptions are extraordinarily good, right? They're extraordinarily good. They can tell you, oh, here's where it looks like this is peaking, this is where you should sell. But then you put real money on the line, something that has real, tangible hopes and fears involved, and suddenly they can't trade to save their life. Okay, they're losing money left and right. And the reason for that is that what's so fascinating to me is that it's the perception changes. They're looking at the same charts and screens that they saw before, right? But now they're making bad decisions based on the same kind of information that before, when they had nothing to lose, they made good decisions about.
Right. Yeah, it's the deployment of the fear mechanism, right? So it's like the person, as soon as they have any fear of loss of anything, their cognitive faculties are not functioning in the correct and appropriate form. But this idea of not just fear, but also this peer pressure notion, because I wanted to talk about the study, and it's related to this. It was studied by Solomon Aschel in 1951, and it's called the conformity experiment. I don't know if you're both familiar with it. I was talking to John before we started going on air about it, and I think it relates to what you were just saying, and to the pandemic, where you had, there was one image with one line of a certain length, and you have another image with 3 lines, and one of the 3 lines, the length of one of the 3 lines matches the image in the first image of the length of the line in the first image. And so you have a group of participants, and say all of them out of 6, say 5 out of 6 are actors. They know what they're supposed to respond prior. And then 1 does not know. So that's the subject. And so what happens is, they go through first round, they answer the same. First, second round, they all get the answer right. And then the actors start to purposely answer the wrong answer. So they'll say, no, it's a different line that corresponds with image 1 and image 2. And so what happens is that one of the actual subject starts to agree with the wrong answer, because that person starts to gaslight and doubt themselves because of fear of some kind of reprisal or disagreeing with the herd. And that's one variation. But there's another variation that's also very interesting, is that you see it's the same thing, except for now the subject, when he sees this occurring, completely disagrees with it and does not gaslight himself, but goes along with it because of like the extreme peer pressure. So there's the difference between the unthinking compliance in the first example and then the thinking compliance in the second example. And then it gets even more interesting in a third variation, where you have two people that are subject, and they're in agreement about what's true, and the actors are saying the wrong answers, but then there's an affinity they create among themselves. And so that applies to maybe like our situation, where we're awake to what's actually happening. And so, there's this correspondence of energy where you're both agreeing that the answers the actors are giving are wrong. It's just interesting to just see how this plays out in the concrete example of the pandemic, because we can see those groups. And then there's the fourth variation, where one of them has to write down the answer, and that's the subject. And because there is no fear in terms of succumbing to peer pressure, most of the time they don't yield, they don't comply. So you could use this as an example of people that voted for Trump, for instance. They'll never vocalize it, but they go and they do it because of fear of reprisal. But I think this plays out well into the pandemic, this notion of conformity. Mm-hmm. And to go back to what you're saying, you're describing it as that people, in the financial markets, the stock market, start to doubt themselves as soon as they see something that's actually, it's concrete. You're going to actually lose money, and they start to panic. So in that sense,
right,
that is the self, we were saying the gaslighting, the self-doubt. And I think the same thing is happening. It's kind of similar to the first example of the Asch, the conformity test. You just start to play along with something that you don't even really agree with, but your mind's not functioning in the correct fashion.
Well, what's fascinating too is that if we know this, right, and we're talking about this, right, and your sister wrote a chapter on this kind of thing, like how concocted is this? In other words, I have to know, if I've studied psychology for the last, it's been in development as a profession for over 100 years, that human beings en masse in a fearful situation in which they're isolated, will the mass formation psychosis. They will run towards a easily delivered authoritative response to something just to get out of the pain of the fear, right? Much like the person in the market making the wrong decision at the wrong time. And then they also know now from these different experiments that most people will go along with the herd, but there's going to be this other group, right, that says, hey, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. And they'll find somebody else who also sees what they see, right?
Right.
And those two will then band together. And what do? They probably find a third and find a fourth. And then they start to get a critical mass, right? And so I would think that if you're perpetrating this, if you're in the World War III disinformation war, or if you're just big pharma that is got hundreds of billions of dollars at stake on a product, and you have a whole bunch of corrupt cronies in your national bureaucracies, right? And that you know this. And so you have to shut down the communication among the individuals that are picking up on this. And in Robert F. Kennedy's book, I don't know if it's in your book, but he covers a lot of the military pharma industrial complex and points out that they were wargaming this prior to the outbreak of the COVID-19 vaccine. And they were wargaming what happens when people start to have vaccine hesitancy and don't think that the vaccine works or is harmful. They were wargaming, well, what happens when people start to think that there's other therapeutics that are useful? And then what happens when they start doing this on social media? And so they were literally getting, at Johns Hopkins and elsewhere, they were getting together the leadership globally of the bureaucrats who are responsible for, managing a pandemic, getting them all on board that when this happens, okay, well, we got to shut down on social media and we got to get big tech to help us, right? Shut this stuff down on social media. And my thinking now, hearing what you're saying, because I hadn't put these experiments together in my mind, I had known about the Lion experiment, but from what you're saying and writing about, it seems to me that if you know the psychology, then you know not only how you can deceive people, but what your obstacles to deceiving them are. Your obstacle is the critical mass of people getting together saying, wait, I know that's a short line and that's a long line, and I'm not going to be gaslit. And I'm going to find friends and colleagues, and we're going to get together and we're going to fight this. So you have to squash that. And it looks like that's what we've been seeing play out for the whole last 2 years, is people who knew this ahead of time and were taking proactive measures to prevent it.
Well, that's exactly what happened on Facebook with Project Veritas discovered, right, with the vaccine hesitancy scores, right? And then it's like, what do? They lessen the amount of views you can get, or people won't see it on the feed.
Yeah.
So they lessen the impact of whatever post you have. And I noticed something interesting. I have about 3,300 people on Facebook. I post something of, with my daughter, just having food or going to the park. I'll get 75 to 100 plus likes.
Yeah.
Or you post something benign, something about a rock star or something like this.
Yeah.
As soon as you start posting anything about COVID or against woke culture, you only get 2, 3, 4 likes from the same friends that always like the same thing, right? And I know for a fact that there's, probably at least 1,000 of those 3,300 people agree with what I'm saying when I post things related to my book or an article. And at the very beginning, I was getting a lot of people that were critical. And we were having back and forth exchanges. But I found that a lot of people on my Facebook were afraid to do anything. Sometimes they would just like my comment and response. And they tell me in a private message, oh, thanks for speaking up. But then they wouldn't even some of them wouldn't even like it. They're so fearful. Yeah. And so even if they have, somebody who's actually willing to go into the lion's den, they still have this hesitancy. They still have this fear. But so that's why I'm, I'm a little bit skeptical as to how many people we can eventually get on board, given that I've seen this, around, that people just don't want to lose their comfort. They'll go and they get the vaccine just because they don't want to lose what they have. They don't want to lose their abilities to travel. But they'll tell me, it's like, no, Scott, you're absolutely right. I know there's this sinister agenda. One friend told me, it's like, oh, well, my girlfriend's for her kids. I'm like, that's not even true. But you're just doing it to appease her and her fears. And so, like I said, the 30% is already far gone. Recalcitrant, we can never reach them. We got our 30%, which we're involved in, and then we got that 40%. And it's, I think, the 75% of that 40, the 30 out of the 40 that we have to get. And it's difficult to see us reaching those numbers. Given this has been orchestrated quite cleverly, but at the same time, there's been a lot of errors they've made, a lot of mistakes. Behind the agenda, there's been a lot of errors, but it's clever. It's basically through and through a psychological attack. on every level. Like if you think about all the divisiveness that's created, even just between me and my daughter, my ex-partner, even family members, my godmother's husband would just be irate. He's a medical doctor who's been retired for 15 years, and him and my father would get into it, two retired medical doctors. But he just couldn't. I mean, it's like he was just so impervious to actual data or logic. Yeah. And then he would go on the ad hominem too. Like he would just start attacking. It's like,
what do you know?
Oh, you know, people that believe fake news, they have, they tend to have, lower IQs or something like this. Absolutely absurd. But, it's like that's what he would have to resort to, as opposed to actually engaging with the actual arguments and the evidence that's presented. It's so disheartening. And I saw that with a number of other people. But then, I didn't have time to keep going back and forth. So I just said, I'm going to limit their profiles now, because you don't have the time to respond to every single message they were sending, but on every post. But anyhow, it was just disheartening to see that even within the family. But that's part of the plan, I think, is to create this division among people, right? So it's just a psychological and spiritual attack through and through. And just to give one more point that John was saying about the World War III, right? The spiritual warfare. And I say that in the preface of the book, that make no mistake, this is a spiritual war. I say it in the epilogue. I say that, there's the mass formation psychosis, there's the unthinking and thinking compliance, there's the mind control. But ultimately, what is it? It's a satanic trance that people are under that can't see the truth.
Yes, it is.
Ultimately, that's what it is.
It's the most insane thing I've ever experienced. When you tell, it was so obvious. So I was super freaked out about COVID early, like January 3rd, 2020. And I made videos and I warned the networks that I worked with, and even like big companies and tech companies, this is coming. We have to be prepared. This is going to be our 9/11 moment. We've got to come together and really work through this. And people thought I was crazy. And then they're suddenly like, you were totally right. And then I was like, well, I wish I wasn't, because now I see all this fraud, and clearly it's something else is going on. I knew I was right to be concerned about something, but the details of it were maybe being faked at the beginning, or maybe they weren't. But whatever the case, part of Broken Truth, this show, and what we're trying to do, this movement, is to help people like you. Have a voice, and I feel like a lot of us that have kids and family, we have an eye on the future, and we can't just shrug our shoulders and lead our little children into the slaughterhouse. We have to stick up. And the world in the olden days, you could go to the new land, America, or then you could move to Ohio, or you could move to Oregon or California, and the bad guys wouldn't be in control there. But we've run out of places to go to. Florida. So it's kind of like all of us little independent thinkers that were hiding under the covers until it was our turn to die, and then our kids crawled into the covers and hide. We're now like Neo in the Matrix. The agents are everywhere, and we're going to have to turn around and begin to believe. And I think that's what's happening. That's why I'm here. That's why Clinton's here. That's why you're here. And as long as we keep the faith that, hey man, God can beat a shot in no time like that. He could just wipe that vaccine away. But, if you keep having your faith in these obvious fraudsters who are controlled by corporations. When you realize it, like BlackRock. Is it BlackRock? Blackwater? BlackRock, right? And Vanguard own 90% of the United States? That's a Goliath worthy of a David attack, for sure. But who's to say who's good or bad in all these organizations? Maybe some are good and maybe some are bad. But my hope is that most people are just misguided from misinformation. And a lot of these misinformation artists seem to come from Brooklyn. I don't know why. But the journalists, Brandy, Brooklyn, Pratt Institute seems to be cranking out some thought leaders.
They have
more like
culture there. I've known,
but there's some hope, right?
That fit what you're saying.
I believe there's lots of hope.
Well, even among the journalists, which are, the most, in my opinion, the most discredited profession now. It's just disgusting what they've been doing. But even CBC, there was, I forget her name, famous journalist. She left. It was too woke for her. She had enough, and she wrote an op-ed about it. And she went in there. She was sometimes 15, 20 years ago, was one of the most leftist people in the room, and now she's like the most right wing in the room. And same with, there's another journalist or writer for the New York Times who left, and he was being critical about the pandemic. I forget his name as well.
I have been seeing that. I've been seeing a lot of people who were outspoken liberals 2 years ago, and you just sort of meet them here and there, who are like, reading, on Substack, reading this stuff, and are totally like reawakened. And quite conservative. You can't even believe the transformation.
I feel like, as far as conservatism is concerned, they need a little nudge. I think solar power is awesome. I think you and I might define conservative a little bit differently. What I mean is, let's just say, let's leave out the political connotations like that. I believe in life.
Right, they're awake, but they sound like us, or even more, extreme, if you will, than us. Right. And that, to me, that's a good sign.
I guess I'm thinking about more along the terms of like the big oil conservatives. I believe that there should be, like, the conservative movement and liberal movement have both been kind of hijacked by the fringes of their thing. Because look, you want to talk about, how many rhinos do we have wandering around in America? A lot. And they are the ones that I think caused a lot of the problems that we had in the last 2 years. That, pander to their voting base, but then when we needed people to stick up and point out things that were going on that were wrong, where were they? But if the conservative side is the side that people are going to, then I hope that side can kind of back away from the anti-Tesla, anti-electric car. I think these things are good. Like, look, if you have kids, don't you want them to have good air?
Oh yeah.
If you believe in life, don't you want that baby that you saved from an abortion to be able to breathe?
That's one of the good things I think coming out of this, right? Is that if we're seeing big corporate interests gaslighting a whole segment of the population for their financial interests, then it raises the question: well, what have we been getting gaslit ourselves on things that we were more open to being gaslit on because of our own political predilections? Mm-hmm. It does rub both ways.
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting to see, like I mentioned earlier, there's, the Liberal Party of Canada is the major party, and you have the Conservative as the opposition party, and then you have the National Democrat Party. But the only ones that were speaking out against this, and what's interesting about this movement, the People's Party of Canada on the federal level, it was fascinating to see, like, people that were, older generation, like we're talking from the hippies generation, like women, like older elderly women showing up to this that supported causes back in the 60s and 70s. And we're seeing, the devastation this pandemic was rotting, and they saw that the PPC was the only party that would stand up for freedom. The conservatives are kind of washed away, and the only time that they came to say anything is because they saw a political opportunity with the truckers convoy. And I blast them about it in the book. and now they're all about supporting civil liberties, but it was inconvenient to say anything otherwise before. The leader of Ontario, the premier, is a conservative, and he had the most draconian policies probably in the Western world in terms of lockdowns. It's just absolutely ludicrous. But yeah, to go back to the issue of, these terms, I don't like left and right a lot of the times, but it's like, this is the way we use the language and people understand it. Ronald Reagan said, it's like, I don't see it as a left and right issue. I see it as an up or down issue. Right?
Yeah.
It's like, where are we going to go destroy our civilization? Or are we going to move up and rise up against, in his context, it was against, the Soviets and being too appeasing to the East. But those words still ring true, right? And I mean, it's more about uplifting one another and doing what's right on a variety of issues that you might label left or right or whatever it is. I mean, you could be conservative and still support certain levels of environmental policies. So it's not all or nothing, right?
Right. So, Scott, is there anything else you want to add? I mean, I think we've covered quite a bit. I don't want to wear you out.
Well, I wanted to mention that now we have starting today, actually at 6 p.m., we have the Rolling Thunder movement coming in, and those are the bikers coming to Parliament. They're continuing what the truckers started. But they've made our downtown core, the Parliament area, in such a way where I'm pretty sure they're not allowing the bikers to get in there, but they're going to be marching on foot. So it'd be interesting to see what kind of movement this will be. It's for the whole weekend, but I don't know to what extent.
I hope you don't get any.
Sorry?
I hope you don't get any acoustic myocarditis from that.
Yeah, exactly. If you attend there, yeah.
Maybe I should. That's great. Maybe I should end with something of a reward for our listeners that have listened so far.
I'll probably break this into two pieces, part 1 and part 2.
Because we will have to run soon. We actually have another interview here today.
Okay.
But,
I'm going to put up your book again, Scott, just so everybody can get it on Amazon.
Oh, and by the way, the book on the far right is a satirical book, The Safe Bet.
Well,
and that one fooled me.
Clinton was taken aback by that, I think, when we first spoke.
Yeah, I thought, wow, this guy's really made a transformation. I mean, he was a lockstep Biden supporter. And, so it's not always that.
Yeah, it was just kind of a fun sarcasm. It was,
I think it's true, though.
Yeah.
Many a true word is said in jest.
Yeah, it's true.
I know Trump came on and he created this chaos and such a visceral reaction from everyone in the news media, people that used to work with him, by the way. And I think with COVID and everything else, a lot of people just wanted it to calm down. Let's just go back to the way things were. They wanted to go back into the matrix, but there ain't no going back.
And hopefully we resist the new normal, right? So.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much.
I wanted to mention that. I just wanted to quickly mention the first book, the Biden book, was published on the True Freedom Press, and same with these two. Yeah. So that's just my own little press there that I started with the Biden book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you thought about getting any other authors in there?
So the COVID-19 has several authors. Oh, for future publications, yeah.
Sure.
I'd be totally open to that for sure.
Because I think that's part of what we have to do, is rebuild our society with our own services, our own tools, our own search engines, that don't obfuscate things that we maybe want to see or we need to see.
Yeah, I saw a segment of one of the last videos you did. I think it was on Google and the algorithms. Yeah, I write about was it Dr. Epstein, who actually does an analysis of what happened with Google, and he said that around 6 million votes he estimates, and he's not a Trump supporter. He estimates 6 million votes were stolen from Trump. just based on the Google algorithms. And then there's Facebook's even another couple million probably or more.
Oh, well, I'll keep an eye out on Brandy's article feed to see him get discredited soon. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, this was around 2020 when he was becoming vocal, but
oh, okay. Well, she must have already got him already.
He's a classical liberal, and I mean, he despises Trump, but at the same time, he doesn't like what's happening to America. So.
What's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I look at it.
Up and down.
All right. Thank you very much, Scott.
Scott, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right, man. Good. We'll talk to you soon.
People, support True Freedom Press. Get a copy of Dr. Ventureyra's book. And also something to think about. You know that I've announced this before, but we are creating an endowment fund, basically a managed fund to support the free press and work like this, both through the Free Press Media Group and other organizations that are doing good work that we seek to help to support. And we know everybody's asking for money these days, especially in light of the tightening of demonetization by big tech. And so what we've created, we've gotten leading market professionals to get together and create a fund that will be managed so that those who give to it, their principal isn't being spent away, and then more requests for handouts follow. The idea is get the money going just like a university does, and then use the proceeds of that to fund Truth in Media. So if you're interested in that, please go to worldtribune.com/endowment. We'll of course have a link in the bottom. And the reward, though, I want for readers is you've heard Scott and I talk a little bit about the markets. And one thing that we're doing, I said readers, listeners, everyone in our audience, if you're interested in really getting a level of understanding of the markets that you can't get anywhere else, and a probably greater level of understanding than you can imagine a person could have, you want to be working with the people that are helping us with this fund. You can you can send an email to RomulusTeaches@yahoo.com. I'll put the email in the link, and come and see the kind of work that we're doing there and the kind of things you can learn to keep your money safe and even grow during what really looks like a bear market that might experience some upward side, but really looks like it may be dropping in the months ahead. And you don't want to lose that capital if you don't have to. So that's something we try to share with our supporters, is the opportunity to engage in the same kind of knowledge and strategies that we use to create 22 to 25% returns annually on an endowment. And we'd like to see you experience that as well. So you can send an email to that, put in the subject line truth, to represent that you heard it through this show, and we'll have somebody get back in touch and something you can listen in on.
Great.
And that's it for today. Thanks everyone.
Have a good day.
Thank you. God bless.